Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are joining us from around the world. I am delighted today to introduce and reintroduce many of you to Dr. Howard Dover, and I will have him introduce himself in a moment. One of the challenges we're dealing with right now is that we are in very, very rough seas, and all of us are looking for a port in the storm. And one of the metaphors I love to use is that lighthouse, right? How we as enablement professionals, as folks in the sales world, can be that lighthouse at times. But there is a lot of stormy weather for us to go through. So to start it today, I'm Sheevaun Thatcher. I'm the VP of Sales and Success Enablement at Slack inside Salesforce. Been there about 6 months. I have a lot of background in enablement, all various types of enablement, which is one of the reasons why I have the honor of interviewing Dr. Dover. Dr. Dover, would you just please take a moment to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Howard Dover. I'm the director of the Center for Professional Sales at the University of Texas at Dallas, where I am a clinical marketing professor. And for those that know UT Dallas, I'm in a pure quant school. That's why I teach sales, of course. That's an inside joke, but and also kind of the coach here, professor, and I recently did a book and formed an institute to kind of study the concepts in the book so that we can get an understanding of why things are working, what's working, and get a third-party verification on all these things that people claim, but we're not quite sure if they're true. So that's kind of my vision where I'm headed. So that's about me.
Thanks, Howard. One of the things that we were going to talk about today was your book. As you see, I've got a lot of tabs in here through this book. I loved reading it, but you didn't want to talk about the book. You wanted to talk about where we are in the state of sales. Some of the terms you've used are what you've been calling phases.
Yes.
Can you spend a couple of minutes and tell us about that? And you've also mentioned that we're spiraling. How do those go together?
Yeah, so I think, 2007, we all, for those of us who are old enough, lived through what we call the Great Recession, right? It wasn't a depression, it was a Great Recession. And so there was a couple of good books that were put out back then. And one of the books that I read, which was not very, it's not very accessible, meaning it was written very economically minded, was a book called, I'm going to look over in my, because I was just looking at it, it's called Manics, Panics, and Crashes. Nice. And so it went through all of the major crashes that occurred, including the 2007, and talked about the fact that all these cycles were preceded by a manic phase, right? So there was a manic stage, and then there was a panic stage, and then there was a crash. So when we look at where we're at in the economic environment, and it really does look like we were just coming out of the manic phase. We were in a mania, especially in the tech sector, specifically SaaS. So we look at the SaaS sector, and a lot of this SDR run-up that we had a manic phase of investment in SDR functionality and a movement by a lot of sales organizations individually and collectively to really double down, triple down, quadruple down, actually 12 times to 13 times down on this idea of let's hire a lot of SDRs. And so now we're entering this phase at which right, if you have a mania, then there's some kind of a panic mode, and then we hit a crash. So we actually had a little bit of a spike in the balloon that occurred during the pandemic. So we had a little bit of a hiccup. But then as we came out of that phase, it became manic again. I really thought we were going to hit the tipping point, but we didn't. And now all of a sudden we're in that kind of panic crash phase right now. So the panic, I think, is here, and the crash is either here or coming. And so we're seeing a lot of layoffs, especially in the tech sector. So
yeah,
I'll leave it there and let you ask some more questions.
Yeah, I mean, what I find fascinating is when you look around, it's not all the sectors are affected by this.
Right. Right.
Why? Why is that? Why is it the tech sector that is being pummeled right now?
Well, so then a couple of thoughts here. The first one is you do have to analyze the current environment and the sector-based concepts. You have to take a look at each sector and ask the question of why are they experiencing what they're experiencing or not experiencing what they're experiencing. And the tech sector specifically had a very tough Q3, Q4 of last year where venture capital basically dried up. And so especially in the SaaS sector, and this is specifically coming from a report that Jocko over at Winning by Design put out. He wrote something on December 22nd of last year. I call it a manifesto, or I don't know what he wants to call it, but because it was such a compelling thing that he said the era of SaaS is dead. And I thought, wow, that's such a strong argument. But what he showed is that the venture capital funding had peaked actually in Q2 to Q3 of 2022, and then had a significant drop off in Q3, late Q3, early Q4, to the point of about a 90% drop off from where it was before. And if you look at the graph, it's a classic mania and crash. So we're in the crash phase of SaaS VC space. And then if you look at the Wall Street Journal about a week ago, they came out and said that VC in general, not just SaaS VC, is at a 13-year low of raising funds. So this is additional, this is right, this downward spiral. And so when you look and think about the SaaS space, the first thing is if all the venture capital dried up, most SaaS is seat-based, right? All revenue is based off seats. So if everybody's going to be laying off, then obviously we don't have seats. And if we don't have seats, we have more layoffs, and then we don't have seats. So we got a downward spiral going on in that space because we had such a manic phase of investment for 3 to 4 years. So everybody thought that, right, there's no top to this. Well, we hit the top, the bubble popped, and now we're going on the other side. And part of that is because of the Fed rate move. So the Fed has moved aggressively over the last 6 months to 8 months to try to combat the inflationary area. Now, the reason this isn't fully across the economy is because of the fact that we had supply chain disruptions in a lot of the manufacturing sector. We also had healthcare that during the period of the pandemic, we basically shut down all of the kind of surgeries that were preventative or there's a lot of pent-up demand in the healthcare space that's non-COVID based. And then you've got the supply chain, the manufacturing space that is backed up for several years in trying to actually even satiate the existing demand that they couldn't fill because they couldn't get combination, you couldn't get workers and you couldn't get parts, you couldn't get chips. And so that's still kind of in a growth phase. So we have an economy that's growing. And I mean, Fed Powell yesterday didn't make anybody happy by saying maybe we slowed down a little too early. And they're talking about even being a bit more aggressive in the interest rates, which then caused the market to go down. Where this impacts a lot of our salespeople, especially in the tech sector, is the fact that now you used to have interest rates at 0. And so you go to venture capital and say, hey, venture capital is not a bad place to park my money. But now you don't have interest rates of 0 anymore. The risk-free rate of return has gone up from 0 to a positive number. So now you've got institutional investors moving their money out of the VC market and putting it into other spaces because at the end of the day, there's other places to put the money. And so this is a challenge, right? That the capitalist moving in the economy, and then of course we have some global economic issues and geopolitical issues that basically are causing the average sales leader to pretty much keep their powder dry and say, I don't know, or at least CFOs to say, this is a wait and see. It's almost like it's Groundhog Day, but we don't know what this chapter is. Remember each year, in 2019, we did our planning, and then we woke up to 2020 and said, oh my gosh. And then we did our planning for 2021, and then we woke up and said, oh my gosh. And we thought, as we're heading through 2022, it felt like a revival, right? We were finally going to get back into some normality. And yet now, due to the economy, at least in the US market, and in a lot of different components, we've got inflation at a level that I haven't seen since I was like a 10-year-old. And I don't remember it, right? I was such a little kid. I don't remember the impacts of that day, but I remember it sucked. That's an academic term, but it just was, it was
You
just
write that one
horrible
down.
as a kid. And my parents were really unhappy. That's all I remember. And gas was really expensive.
Mhm.
So we're in that, and we're in this economic issue, and we're in a VC kind of slowdown, and we probably over rotated anyway on talent development. And so that's where we're at. And so it's like, oh my gosh, it's Groundhog Day, but we're not living the same story, right? We're now living this inflationary, this increasing rate from the Federal Reserve. We do have a war going on in Europe. We don't know, it's another aspect to the geopolitical risk that everybody is having to look into it. So when you look at the fact, an interesting statistic last year, we ended 2022 with one of the lowest car sales in years. I think it was down $1 to $2 million units sold. And that wasn't, once again, I'm going to go with a guess. This is a pure conjecture. I don't think it was the people didn't want to buy cars. I don't think it was the fact that the dealers didn't want to sell cars. It was the fact that they couldn't get cars made because they didn't have the chips and the parts. Yeah. And this is the same in some of the manufacturing sector. I was just at a conference, the National Collegiate Sales Competition, and there were almost no tech people in there looking for jobs. By the way, that job fair was half to a third of what it was a year ago. I was at another event 2 weeks ago where they were trying to hire salespeople. That one was down a half to a third from a year ago. So lots of lowering of the number of people who are hiring in sales, probably due to the over rotation and the lack of financial money coming into the venture capital space, which then reduces the number of people in the B2B who can buy your product. So that's where we're at.
Yeah, I mean, that was, the beginning of that pandemic. I remember March 4th, 2020 was the last business flight that I took, right? And because everything changed right after that. Boom, the world just turned around. So it sounds like a lot of doom and gloom, right? Are companies actually aware of what it is you're talking about? Are they reacting positively? Are they reacting even at all?
Well, I think that, so I would have to go with it. They're reacting. Yes, that's why we're seeing layoffs, right? It's what we're seeing, layoffs. And so, so I would say, depending on the sector, right? If you're sitting in the sectors where you over rotated on talent, you're having to cut. And maybe, I mean, if you're in the venture capital or the pre-IPO space, if you're in that pre-IPO space, you may be cutting to the bone. Yeah. We're going to have a lot of consolidation. We're going to have a lot of companies just disappear. And listen, when the money doesn't flow, you can't have people. It's just the way it is. If your product wasn't viable, and so we're just getting a lot of change there. I think this is where Jocko's report was just so compelling to me. And I get a lot of stuff. I get sent a lot of stuff. And so I think it was a week before Jocko wrote, he said, "Hey, Howard, I'm working on a paper." And I thought, "You're so weird. You don't write papers." He said, no, I'm writing a paper. And so this was, I was getting ready. My family was in town for the holidays. And then on December 2nd, I think he sent me a copy and said, "Hey, here it is." And I went, okay. And I glanced at it. And then the next day I read the whole thing and I went, oh my gosh. Because what he predicted is that people won't know it's happening until we get into Q2, Q3. I'm sorry, Q1, Q2, because right, everybody in Q1, we're all doing our kickoffs. We're flush with the money. We're going, right? But boy, a lot of my partners, as I've talked to them, they're all pulling back, no recs. They're not rescinding offers at the moment, but they're not planning to requisition any additional hires for most of 2023. We're back to the, I don't think I'm going to hire in 23 moment, which is a really weird, eerie moment for collegiate people. You're trying to come out, and the thing is, right now we're stuck where we're at.
Yeah,
there are a few sectors that are in growth, but once again, I think that's controlled growth. So, and I think we've got a lot of bad, let me revise. I think we've got the wrong people on the bus.
So that's where I'm going next. Clearly, this whole maelstrom that we're in right now has really hurt the enablement profession in a lot of ways. Number
Yes.
one, folks that are doing really good work are being laid off anyway. And, so maybe there was a little bit of thinning, but for the most part, there are folks on the street right now trying to get jobs and become, go back in to do the work that they were so used to doing, where the jobs may not be there, or they may not be at the level that they were used to, or, they're starting to look at becoming private consultants, because that's the avenue out. So as enablement professionals, what do we do? How are we going to get through this? Not only for ourselves personally, but also for the programs that we're running, because even the number of constituents we deliver to has dropped pretty dramatically.
Well, I think you and I were talking about this on the pre-call. I think it really comes down to this division of enablement, right? If you're little s enablement, this is Rob Peterson and I, we've done several papers. I don't know that we ever explicitly put this out there, but when he and I talk, we talk about little s and big S. And little s is I'm sales enablement and I train and enable the sales function. So the sales people, my focal point is on the department of sales and generating whatever they need and giving them enablement, right? And that, to me, that's little s, and people can be mad at me, but I'm going to leave it there and then talk about big S. Now, big S is that I do that, and I'm looking at technology. I'm looking at strategic inflow of revenue. I'm actually a strategic player in this space, and I'm actually looking at optimality, and I'm looking at how we generate revenue in the most efficient way. And I'm really not dependent on the size of the org, because I may be helping in the decision of right-sizing that org, because if I deploy the proper technology in a market like today with pinpoint precision, I don't know that I need the head count, but I do need people to be trained and supported in a way that actually justifies the spend of support structure and enablement strategy. That's big S. Right. That's big S enablement, where I'm on the strategic side of the fence. By the way, in my view, there has never been a greater moment in the world than now for big S people who actually know what they're doing, who are strategic. They know how to take even a small group and generate revenue with them with a great leader. Versus if my whole identity was around developing content for large groups of people, and then also training massive amounts of people, onboarding and supporting big, large organizations, but I was never quite cresting that strategic component. Yeah, it's a tough world now, because we're going to be shrinking. My perspective at the moment would be, if I had to call it, I'd say in 2024 we see this reverse a little bit. And I don't think it's going to be as dire as it seems. I think growth will come back in 2024. I just don't think this is going to be a hard stop recession. I think this is going to be a slow down recession, but the geopolitical pieces are the one thing none of us can predict right now, right? The geopolitical challenges. If we contain what's going on, then we're okay. But if this breaks out, it sure doesn't seem to want to stay contained with some of the geopolitical pieces. So that's the caveat there, right? But the Fed isn't going to keep putting on the brakes. I'll get a little economic and then get out of it. The problem we faced was that we had a fiscal stimulus that was unsustainable, to a point that we pushed too much money into the economy that caused the inflationary bubble. Well, okay, that's kind of whatever side of the political aisle you are, we're now in a mixed government, so that's going to stop because they can't agree on anything. So we're going to stay steady there. But basically, we were fighting the Fed. the fiscal was fighting the Fed, and that's why the Fed has to be so aggressive right now. If they worked in tandem, this wouldn't have been as painful, but it wasn't done in tandem. So we had overheating in several different places, and it's going to take time to get that patted back down to where it's normal. We're getting closer, but the sector-based challenge is the problem because we have growth. So I think the thing to look at, if I was in enablement, I would be looking at the fact that we over-rotated in some sectors and we're underemployed in other sectors that are sitting in a growth space. So you may actually want to look outside of your normal channels. If you're normally in tech, you may want to do, my friend Ryan Bott, he went from tech in Silicon Slopes and he went over to a traditional place called Sodexo. And he transformed the company. Very interesting shift. Definitely not tech. Sodexo is not tech at all. It's food. So, you can make those transitions. And what you've learned in the tech sector, you could, once again, if you're big S, right, you're strategic, you could move into those spaces and they would value you greatly. But you do have to be open to pivot. And that's one of the challenges that are happening at the Fed's level, is they're saying, well, wait a minute, there's still too many jobs available, but it's in the wrong sectors. Everybody's in one sector is becoming laid off, and there's the other sector where they just need a lot of people. So this is going to be a tough period. We all got to kind of keep our eyes open. And definitely, I think there's opportunity even in the strategic space. If you're in the pre-IPO space, it's just tough. I mean, that's where it's just tough.
I could not imagine being there right now. I mean, companies, I'm at Salesforce, and, for a long time, Salesforce followed the same type of bubble, right? It was all about growth, grow. Last year was a great indication, right? This great resignation that we all went through. I know as a leader and a manager, I spent all of my time trying to figure out how to keep my team supported in such a fashion that they were getting what they needed so they would not get taken away by other companies that were offering these ridiculous salaries and these ridiculous roles. And it's one of those, when you look back at it, it was a very painful time to be in, but it changed very quickly. So when I hear people saying, how long is this going to go? I'm like, you know what? Great resignation to now it's over, right? It happened that fast. And we got through that.
I think that's the challenge. I think, when COVID hit, I remember everybody said, I want to go back to, we're going to have the new normal, go back to some kind of normal. And
there's no
I put something out there a little bit ago on LinkedIn about Black Swan event. And a lot of people challenged me, and that's okay. I think we're still in one. I mean, we're still in one. The cycle.
What does that mean? The Black Swan event? How would you describe that?
Well, a Black Swan event is something you really couldn't have planned for, right? It's just a once in a lifetime, just odd thing that happens like a pandemic, like a global pandemic. We couldn't have planned for it. We didn't have a strategic plan for it. We're not going to see it again. But the issue is there's two ways to thinking about it. Either we're in multiple Black Swans, or this is still the ripple, right? We're still in the midst of the ripple of a global pandemic. And the way it happened in 1918, because there was a global pandemic then that was of equal magnitude. Actually, it was much horrible. The Black Death in Europe, and I had lots of relatives or ancestors in my line that all died, and you could see the black lines in different areas of England on when people died and didn't die, and it was horrible. So we're still in the post-pandemic process. That's part of the geopolitical challenges. That's part of the, some of the other challenges in the economic growth engines, and part of this robustness of coming out of the economy, coming too hot, the government spending way too much money early instead of spreading it out and putting too much money in the economy. So we're still kind of part of the ripple of that event that occurred. And so anybody who thinks they can predict it is a little silly. I mean, I think we're just, so to me, I think we're still in that big event. And we'll talk about this for years when we're older. and say, yes, I survived the pandemic, but boy, it wasn't just 1 year, it wasn't 2 years. There was this and there was that, and there was all these things that happened. It's because of the panic that hit is now causing additional panics, shocks, and a little bit of crisis, right? I don't think the crisis is going to get anywhere near 07, 08, because 07, 08 was a housing bubble that just destroyed banking and destroyed a bunch of other things. This is being caused by overspending, and it's being caused by the Fed printing too much money and leaving interest rates too low. So this will be pulled back, but it's being somewhat controlled. And so as long as geopolitical things stay normal, so the challenge is, where do I go? But I don't think we're going back. That's the piece I'm not quite sure of. And in my book, I was like, I just don't see how at some point we hit a tipping point. I don't have enough evidence to know we're there, but it was expected. And when I saw that drop off of the funding in the SES VC index, I went, oh, that'll pop it. And I think we're in that. And I think other companies are going to figure that out later in the game in Q2, Q3, because when they develop their plans, B2B sellers, not B2C. B2C is still pretty strong, by the way. So the consumer is doing relatively well. A lot of the SMB market actually is doing relatively well. It's your mid-size and your enterprise that's starting to pull. And so this is going to be confounding to a lot of people. And they're not, those who've got their finger on the pulse will recognize it and start pulling back now. And that's where we're seeing the layoffs. But other people are not going to see it until they can't hit their numbers. And then what I think we're going to see is additional rounds. I really do. I wish it wasn't so, Sheevaun, I really do, but I just think it's not over. I think it's in a cycle that's going downward, and then it's going to probably keep going down. I don't think it's going to be it's harsh to anybody who's impacted. So I don't want to be insensitive, but I don't think it's going to be, I think other sectors are going to bring it up. I think China coming online is going to do some things. I think so there's other things that are going to bring growth. It's just going to be hard. And
it's going to be hard for a while. Yeah. I mean, it's going to be, what I'm starting to hear is that now it's all about the margins again. And it's all about, I've seen companies changing their whole go-to-market, for example, is that they're recognizing that a big ticket item now is going to be very, very difficult to have a company invest in, because it means a total revamp of what they've already got. Most companies are looking at, what do I have? Can I enhance here? Can I enhance there? What do I do? And for me, from an enablement perspective, that is a real opportunity for us as enablement folks, because taking that strategic viewpoint, not being afraid to do the research, not being afraid to say, okay, what is going on here? What other ways can we take economic information? Like, this has been an MBA in economics, thank you, Howard. This has been fabulous. To take this kind of information and go back to our leaders and say, hey, wake up. This is what's happening. Here are the kinds of things that we think will have an impact, a measurable impact. Stop working on it over there. Start doing things over here, like coaching of your leaders, like teaching your managers, right? All of these things that are typically don't have time for that, right? We have to get the revenue number in. Well, the revenue number has dropped off. So now you've got to think about, how do you get that performance back up again? And so those are conversations that, as you said, the big S enablement folks are being able to do and need to be able to do. And even those that are interviewing, those are the conversations you need to have. Those are the kinds of things you need to talk about.
Yeah, and I think one of those interesting numbers that came out by Mark Benioff was the percentage of revenue. I thought he said like 90% of his revenue was being generated by, it was less than 50% of the sales reps. Like 90, they knew somehow. Now, why Mark went out and put that on public, I think it was him trying to say, half of my people, I don't know that we can keep having you hang around, right? And that's a tough one. and I'm not picking on your, I'm not, not picking on your home turf there. It's just, I think a lot of revenue leaders are having to say, this is coming back to, do I have the right people on the bus? And so actually, if ever there's a moment for enablement to find the moment to shine, it's now, because to say, well, if we don't, what I think the bigger question is, are the people on the bus trained for the moment that we're in?
Yeah, are they the right people?
And if they're not the right people, we give them the opportunity to become the right people, or we need to go find the right people. And I think that's a challenge, because a lot of the right people, it's different skills. And I think listen, we've gotten away for quite some time in the SaaS culture with, all I do is get a meeting and get a recurring revenue contract that isn't, I'm not saying it isn't hard, everybody, so don't hate me. But I am saying that I don't know that the skills that are needed now were developed in that environment. As everybody had money and everybody was buying things and saying, yeah, I'll buy your product, you buy my product. Now that's off the table. Now you have to actually sell.
Yeah. I mean, in 2008, 2008 was a big year for me. That's where I became an enablement person, because otherwise I was going to lose my job, right? It was one of those where I was being laid off or try this new thing. No idea what this new thing was. And so, helping build it up, helping do all of that kind of stuff, which has put me in that big S category, which has been phenomenal. But I made a lot of little S mistakes, a lot of them. But one thing that we did learn was that you couldn't go out there and sell a product anymore. You had to sell what the customers needed, which was a solution to solving their pain, right? And I'm starting to see it. It's all coming back. And people are like, what do we need to do now to get people to pay attention? And I'm like, listen to them. What are their pains? What are you doing that can solve the pain? Or how can you help them discover that the pain is there? And if you can't solve it, don't be afraid to help them solve it another way, right? Add value. Add value.
Yeah, and so sorry to be, such a downer here, but we are sitting in fallow land because of all the SDR hiring and all the mechanization. We're sitting in a fallow field that has been overplowed too many times over. So that customer is also very non-reactive. According to Gartner research, that 78% of them don't even want to talk to a salesperson. Yet in the same research, like 80% of them want you to be relevant. So it isn't the fact that I don't want to talk to you. It's the fact that every touch you've made with me actually has been so inconsequential and or costly that I don't value you. But yet I want to value you. So that's our challenge, is actually, if you're very strategic and you know what you're doing, this is exactly the moment where I'd be kind of marching into my leadership and saying, hey, listen, if we haven't already made the pivot plan, we need to now, because if we need to get ready for things being more challenging, we need to be more effective and more efficient, not more efficient. We've been working on efficiency for way too long, folks. We need to be effective and then deploy efficient strategies. Let's move this organizational group from, hey, I need to do it faster, better. I need to do it better and faster, but in that sequence, and start proving the value of enablement. Start saying, I can bring us to this new level of performance productivity, and I'm going to be valuable in this moment. We still need to generate revenue, but our customers don't want to talk to us because we are doing it the way we've always done it, which isn't going to work now.
So that brings me to my next one. And this is, you talk a lot about the technology adoption and behavioral shift cycle, and I'll get or tabs. We are hearing that, I mean, it's blowing up about Chat GPT. And GPT, for those who don't know, stands for Generative Pre-trained Transformer, which is essentially means taking deep learning and producing human-like text. I tried it last night for the first time on a vision statement, and it blew me away, right? Chat GPT is an example of it. Comes from a company called OpenAI, which was created by folks that we know, right? Sam Altman and Jessica Livingston, who were the founders of the Y Combinator, Elon Musk, everybody knows him, Reid Hoffman, the founder of LinkedIn, Peter Thiel, the co-founder of PayPal and Acid, one of the first investors in Facebook, and Ilya Sutskever, a Canadian computer scientist who's now the chief scientist at OpenAI and others. And so in your book, you talk about tabs and how people need to be able to pay attention to that. How is this new tech going to fit within that cycle? And how do you foresee it transforming enablement and sales? Because it's already doing it.
Yeah, content. I worry for all the people who want to go into content generation and marketing degrees. And so content, I think Dave Brock posted something on this. This is the marginal cost of content creation just went to zero. I mean, Ryan Reynolds put out a video for his Mint Mobile and said, hey, we're trying to cut costs. And he literally asked OpenAI ChatGPT to write a script for him as if it was him. And he read off the script. And he kind of was like, that is kind of creepy how good this is.
Oh, it's startling. It's startling.
No, I think so once again, we're at the innovation phase, right? So if we're looking at the cycle, so then we have to look at what is the adoption curve going to look like. So, and once again, adoption, you need to look at both depth and breadth. So when I talk about depth and breadth, I won't go into it in great detail, but it is in the book. This idea that organizationally and how much are we going to use it, right? How many different ways are we going to use it? And so, so that's an area in which we kind of want to look at. But what's interesting to me, Sheevaun, is a lot of our tech vendors, the sales tech vendors, are already deploying it at extremely fast paces.
Salesforce just announced two, Einstein GPT and Slack GPT. It's like, okay, my job just changed overnight.
So I think the speed is very fast on this. But once again, we've got an adoption curve ahead of us, right? So the innovation is in and of itself is interesting. The fact that you go try it once isn't that interesting, right? If we try it once, that means we've played with it, but we haven't adopted it. I think what we have to look at is full-blown adoption. And I think there are some people learning how to use it in very, very unique ways. There's a lady, I just find her fascinating. I always find there's always these new voices that come up and just do fun stuff. And I think her last name's Lloyd. It's like Charlotte Lloyd. She's in the UK. And every day she's posting, hey, how I use ChatGPT as a salesperson today. And man, there's people who hate, there's a lot of hate on her posts. But just one little piece of information that was fascinating. She said, hey, if you can't afford Zoom Info, or you can't afford Sales Intel or Seamless AI, whatever the case may be, try ChatGPT. I'm finding it's 50% accurate to give me the cell phone number of the person I need to talk to. And then when you look at bad data, because there's other platforms that go figure out how bad your data is. I think a couple of people told me that's close to 40% of data is bad that's in your database anyway, or that you get from the major providers. So I don't know that you lose a whole lot by using ChatGPT to go say, hey, it is a couple of years old, but 50% is pretty good for contact info. And just a simple little moment and thing. I had a student the other day, this was a great use of it. He said, I was contacting Travelers Insurance. And the kid he said, I don't know anything about commercial insurance. I don't even know what Travelers does. So he types it into ChatGPT and said, what would be the top 3 things that if you were Travelers in sales that would be your pain? It gave him like 5 points to bring up. So he brought it up and the person immediately responded to him and said, wow, you're so knowledgeable about our industry.
Yeah.
That's called relevance.
Let's put that's called relevance, but let's put the caveat on it a little bit, right? It's only based on data that it's got, and there can still be mistakes, right? I think it was Abraham Lincoln who said, don't believe everything you read on the internet, right? So
For
you have to
sure.
be some cautious, right? Make sure you double check what's there. It's the fact that it can generate some of this stuff really capably with a lot of information, right? And it can do this. It can really, so it's changing our world. It is changing our world. And I think people who ignore it, I mean, you and I talked about how it's changing even the university functions and how you check to ensure your students understand what it is they're learning.
Yeah, with the advent of basically all Harvard cases can't be assigned anymore, right? I mean, it's just that, case-based work, we've all got to reinvent the MBA programs, because basically you can ask ChatGPT to write your report, write your case notes, and you won't be able to detect, and it'll be better, there'll be better answers than what they would have written. So, and that's our challenge, right? Is that now one of the things that I've heard, and I need a sabbatical so I can go learn more. I need to like come hang out where you're hanging out and go talk to a lot of people and learn from people. But alas, I'm teaching my day job, right? So my understanding is it's generative. So that creates a little bit of a challenge from a fact-based concept. Mm-hmm. So it's not always factual, because it's generating thought based off of the collective information available. So when you ask it for sources, it sometimes makes up sources. In fact, it does make up sources, because it's like the person, it's the know-it-all you find at a bar, right? They know everything, but you don't know that it's accurate. In fact, oftentimes they're throwing out reports, but it isn't coming from that report. So there are limitations, but I don't think it was designed to be a research tool. I don't think it was designed to be a Google, although it's causing Google some fits. But I think it is designed to do good work. And I think you're going to ask it fundamental questions, and it gives you a lot of data quickly. I think you can ask it to do a lot of work, and it will do it faster and maybe cleaner than what you did. I actually wrote an article on the three. I was asked by the Sales Education Foundations to write an article on the renaissance of sales technology, sales renaissance, and what we need to look at. And I asked ChatGPT to write it for me, and I almost submitted it as my article. And then I kind of thought, well, maybe that wouldn't be appropriate. I was gonna give it authorship, and I was gonna say created by or written by ChatGPT and edited by Howard Dover. And then I decided I would write a secondary article around it, but I actually submitted the article as an inset, that what was written, and actually it was pretty good. I mean, it was spot on. It included, I said, what are the three trends? What are the four things professors should do to change? The three trends were spot on. And then the four things that professors should do, 2 out of the 3 were good. Or two out of the 4. So not bad, right? So it's like having a conversation with a smart person that is out there learning a bunch of stuff. You don't always agree, and you need context and relevancy, but at least starts to ideate some things. So I think it's gonna shift behavior a lot. I think there's gonna be a lot of demand. I think if I had to predict based off the sales innovation paradox and where we are currently, I would have to say 80% of orgs will use it to just spew more, just do more and more and more. So they'll just use it to automate the salespeople. I only think 15 to 20% of orgs will actually harness it in a way that's productive, but 80% will actually. So I think we'll actually end up in a worse place for a vast majority of the market, but I think 10 to 15% will actually get massive competitive advantage. And I think it will increase effectiveness at a phenomenal rate. We're playing with a companion technology around Lavender right now. Very fascinating use of AI to coach you, right? To coach you on
how Jen Allen
relevant.
Is now, right? From the Challenger.
Yeah,
she's at Lavender, yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's going to be fascinating to see where this goes. It really is. Technology. See how it helps us get out of this situation that we're in. So we've got about 13 minutes left. There's a number of questions in the Q&A. So I'm going to go through them and, answer.
Can I make one statement though? It's kind of a charge.
Sure.
I always like to give a charge, especially to sales enablement people, because you have the power to change the world, in my view. You have the
Yeah.
power. Whether you take the power or not to change the world's another element, but you have the power to change the world. And I would like to propose this: the models and methods that you use to get here are not the models and methods you need now. So we need to collectively come together, visit with each other, learn from each other. Let's not double down on stupid anymore. No more 13x on SDRs. Let's actually get more efficient and effective. And let's raise the profession. I think it's a moment in time. We have the capacity, but we can't use the models we know. The models and
It's
methods.
a pivot point. 2008 was a pivot point. 2023 is another pivot point, and it's a big
huge
one.
Pivot point, yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm excited about it. Generally, I'm very excited about it because I think the people who know how to do this don't need to worry. They just need to get to work.
Yeah, yeah, and be open, right? You got an open heart, open mind, right? That
You know,
kind
you
of thing.
said something in our pre-call, and I kind of want you to say it, because if I say it, they may get mad at me. But if you say it, I think it's legit. You made a comment that you said that there was somebody that you were talking to who says, if I just hide, they won't notice me.
Yeah, yeah, there was. I mean, because with all the layoffs going on, right? You talk to some folks, and they're like, I won't be seen. If I just hide, then I won't be seen, and I
right?
put my head down, and I just do my work, and then I'll be safe. And my response back was, I'm going to do exactly the opposite. I want to make as much noise, be as loud as possible, be as open and conversational and brave as I possibly be, so that I can make sure people understand the value that our ideas and our strategies as enablement folks can have on the impact of the success of an organization. And more than that, the success of the organization when dealing with their customers. I don't want to be small and little and disappear. I want to be big and loud and brave and strategic and get people to look at life and the world differently, because it is different now. There is no going back.
There's no going back. Let's go ahead. Let's move forward.
All right. So 11 minutes. I'm going to go through these
All right.
and I'll start from the very first one. So Amy Mellick said, do you think hiring will pick up late Q2, Q3 in 2023, specifically in the tech space?
No, I think we actually, tech space, I don't think it's going to flush its way out until 2024. I think we're on a downward spiral for a while in tech.
Okay. Bob Britton asked, isn't the enablement layoff phenomenon indicative of those companies not understanding exactly what enablement is and the value it can bring?
No, I think it's directly related to the number of sales jobs that's being whacked in the first place. I mean, so maybe Bob, but I think when you look at the total headcount reduction that's going to happen, if you look at it directly related, it should be in tandem, right? I mean, if you have a sales org and you're going to cut 20% of the sales org, you're probably going to also do an equivalent cut, because if that's the way, once again, if you're little s, that's the way it's valued, isn't it? You know, if I have that many headcount here, then we cut down headcount there. Now, versus strategic, if you're strategic enablement, they would get it and say, well, they go to the enablement leader and say, hey, help me understand where can we make some efficiencies, given that we're reducing the other, or do we need everybody to be, because we're making these pivots and transitions? But no, I think it's directly related. Listen, at the end of the day, a lot of this is funding cuts. If you don't have funding, you can't keep even the salespeople, right? So I don't think it's that I don't get enablement, it's that a lot of it's I don't have funding, period. So that's a problem. So actually it's very complex. There's way too many facets to that question. But
yeah, there's another one from Andrew Robertson. You want to talk about facets? Please define the term sales enablement, and it has very different versions across the L&D industry.
I will refer you to the several papers by Rob Peterson and myself. The one that's very accessible, we call the Dirty Baker's Dozen, that's available at the Journal of Selling. at NIU. It's available for everybody for free of charge. If you want to go into the one that's not accessible, meaning that's very hard to read, you can look at our Journal of the Journal of the Academy of Marketing Science paper, which goes into a very, very academically dense, rich framework of enablement from all the research Rob did during his sabbatical. For those of you who want to be highly technical, that would be the other piece of the puzzle. I think it means different things to different people because it has different functions in different places all over the world, which is another paper we wrote as well. So
yeah. Another question Andrew had is, what is the direct impact on the need for professional sales methodology and process training for companies?
well, I'd like to get past this fact that we actually, this is my own little thing. We've actually removed sales process training from UTD for about 3 years. And we moved to a universal framework on buyers. What do buyers actually do? And we don't teach a methodology. We talk about a framework of buyer behavior, and then we discuss different methodologies that can lay on top. So there are certain skills that are needed at certain, and we're using the Gartner jobs to be done framework as our framework. So when a buying group or buying individual is in a state, they need to get that job done so they can move to another state. And so there are certain skills you may need to deploy at that moment. And then we could look at a methodology, but usually the methodologies are processing. I'm processing a buyer. And the buyer doesn't want to be processed. The buyer has to get a job done. So that's our fundamental problem. This is what I'm talking about, modern methods. In the book, I talk about modern motions and modern methods. And the motions comes from our friend Juliana. She mentioned motions once, and I've just loved the word ever since. Like, it's the way we do it. It's how we do it. It's the motion we make. And there's skill to that. And we can do it really bad. Right? You think about Simone Biles flying through the air. People have been flying through the air for a long time. That's the motion. But it's
I can fly through the air. Certainly would not be a pretty landing.
But it's the way Simone flies through the air.
Yeah.
It's the motion she's making that's modern, that's innovative, that is relevant to this moment. And so the classic concepts that we often teach through methodologies, listen, at the end of the day, it's figure out what the buyer needs, try to help them progress, and let them buy. And if we could get there, we found phenomenal results with it. And we're ending our experiment right now, just because for lots of different reasons. We've done it for 3.5 years. We've proven it can be done, and it's phenomenally successful. And now we're trying to iterate to say, can we teach it a little bit differently? We're trying to increase the effectiveness again, right?
Yeah, actually Natasha McIntyre has a great question, actually fits nicely in with that. We still have about 5 minutes left, Howard.
Yes, we're good.
And what advice can you give to sellers and those in enablement who are in the enterprise tech stack on closing deals and survival for 2023? I think it's a great question.
So Matt Dixon's got some compelling research right now that he wrote a little book on that everybody's talking about.
The jolt effect, is that it?
The jolt, yeah. I just read the Harvard Business Review article on that. Talks about this. It's not status quo. We're not fighting against status quo. We're fighting against customer indecision. And I love what he's talking about. He said it's no longer the fear of missing out, which is fighting the status quo. It's fighting the fear of messing up. Yeah. And so I think you've got to clean up your pipeline, to be honest with you. And that's what he actually describes. And I think that once again, we're in a modern era, coming back to harnessing modern tools. And if the company has no signs of the ability to make change, and by the way, we have some AI tools that can tell you the probability of an organization being able to get together and make a change. It's very nascent, so we haven't been able to prove this much, but I like some of the stuff that's coming out in this space. The players in this would be Crystal Knows, XIQ. There's some work Scott Gillum is doing out of Washington, D.C. around this. It's very, very compelling. And it's kind of saying, hey, at the end of the day, if we look at an org as we're approaching that org, we could actually use personality profiling to develop probability of even being able to make a decision around change. And then when you bring in Matt and Ted McKenna's work on the jolt effect, you start saying, well, there's a lot of people that'll never be able to make a decision. So I guess my advice would be, hey, start disqualifying a whole lot of people that are never going to do anything. And we have modern tools that will give us some probability of who those people are. And that's crazy, and it's fun, and it's exciting. And I think we live in a fun world. We waste a lot of time in sales talking to the wrong people. And so we've got to clean the pipeline, look at modern concepts, really be realistic about nice to have and need to haves. People are not going to be buying a whole lot of need to haves unless they have a lot of money. But if you're a nice to have, good luck. If you're a need to have, well, figure out the people who are actually going to adopt, not just play, and go after them and spend the time on those opportunities. Be a bit more strategic in the time use. But this comes back, Sheevaun, this comes back to, don't we need enablement?
Yes.
Don't we need enablement right now? Because we got to bring these people in and say, hey, guess what? You can't sell the way you've always sold. You've got to sell a bit more strategically. We've got to look at who has the highest probability of actually closing. And you can't use that as your sole decision component, but you should look for additional signs. The part that the first J, the J of the jolt effect, is you got to judge. You got to judge. Are you sitting with a group that will be incapable of making a decision? And Hank Barnes has been studying this for years over at Gartner, saying there's companies that literally can't figure out how to change. And we're trying to sell to them. We got them in our pipeline. Let's clean up the pipeline. Let's be realistic. Let's focus on the people. And unfortunately, this may mean that we need less people, but if we're enablement people, we maybe need to retrain a lot of people. We need to do a lot of training, get the right people on the bus, or make sure the people on the bus become the right people. One of the two ways.
That is a whole other conversation. Who are the right people on the bus? So Howard, we are at time, and we've talked a lot about, some doom and gloom and warnings that people need to heed. There's one piece of advice you had for the folks on this call that you can deliver in, 15, 20 seconds. What would that be?
Hire and become a sales disruptor.
Wow.
Disrupt the existing sales machine. Hire. By the way, UTD is producing sales disruptors. So some friends of mine a few years ago said, you're producing kids that just blow up my org. And he said, they don't just do stuff. They're literally disrupting. And I said, huh. They said, you got to quit telling people you're hiring regular talent. And now I call them disruptors. They're sales disruptors. Hire, become a sales disruptor that breaks the paradox.
That's absolutely awesome. I love it. Well, Dr. Dover, it has been an absolute treat. Learned a lot from you today, and I'm sure the folks that have been watching this also did. It's been recorded, which is awesome. I believe we are done. And folks, if you did not get your questions answered today, be sure to go to sesociety.org, reach out to Howard, reach out to me, reach out to anybody, put a post on LinkedIn. I heard this. Oh, wow. What do I need to know from it? There's a lot of folks out there that are happy to help. And, this is the beginning of the turnaround, and we are all part of it and can all be part of it.
So we forgot one piece. So we'll go with the first 5 people. Unfortunately, this is a US. First 5 people that post about this webinar, mention both the Sales Enablement Society and myself. I will send you a Kindle copy of the book for free.
That's
So,
awesome. There's actually somebody I saw as we were starting, someone from Brazil is online. This is not North America only, Howard. This is global.
yeah, it's unfortunate. I don't know why I can't get them outside of the US. So I figured that I've got the last time I said that I had some people in England.
I think it's the Amazon issue.
It is the
It's
Amazon.
It's not you.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you, my friend. Can't wait to see you in person. Take
Same
care.
here. Thanks.
Bye, Howard.
Bye-bye.